Welcome. Thank you very much for showing up for yourself and for your nervous system. This masterclass, it's all about meeting your nervous system and understanding your predominant state. Without this, you can't really know how to go about regulating yourself. So it's absolutely crucial for you to understand how your nervous system works and what is your predominant state, and maybe you have a few. So I'm going to go through the very basic understanding, very basic knowledge without giving too much detail, too much science, because it's not necessary. It's about your lived experience. So don't try to memorize things and don't try to analyze things or overanalyze things like we used to. Think about your lived experience. And I'm going to be talking about different states from a few angles, so you will be able to understand for yourself through the body. So connect with your body while I'm talking about the states. Just to give you a bit of a background, okay, about the nervous system and the body. When I use nervous system or the body, I mean, for me, they're equal, okay? So this is, in the world of this knowledge, they're equal. Body and the nervous system are the same. Nervous system lives in your body, so one cannot exist without the other. Nervous system is a responsive system. Your body constantly scans your environment. Depending on the environment that you have been in or grew up in, so what was the predominant experience, what was happening around you for most of the time. So we're not talking about one thing, we're not talking about once a month, we're talking about a lived experience day in and day out. If your environment was unsafe, psychologically, mentally, emotionally, there was chaos, there was a lot of issues and dysfunction, and you were a little child, you had absolutely no choice as to how to react, what to do with what was going on around you. But your nervous system has a choice, right? So it's a responsive system. And we respond to our environment all the time. Your nervous system scans, your body scans the environment for signs of threats or ways to connect or reasons to connect. This is what we are. Nervous system is asking the question, am I safe? Am I safe here? As children, we don't have a choice. We don't realize certain things. As adults, we don't realize things. So there's nothing to worry about. Nervous system is absolutely healable. So based on your experience, your nervous system has two choices. It can respond in two ways, okay? If it's safe, if everything is safe around you, you are supported and surrounded by people who are supportive to you, who are protecting you, and everything is well, then your nervous system responds. The response of the nervous system in that situation is called parasympathetic response. This is when you are safe and social and everything is okay around you and your nervous system can relax, your body can relax, you can laugh, you can play, you can feel joy. This is like a, for a lot of people that is really, we don't remember how that feels, okay? That's the society today. It's called rest, digest, regenerate and play and flow. There are many names for it. This is where basically your nervous system and your body feel safe. There are no threats around you. Nothing bad is going to happen. Everything works optimally in your body. Muscles are relaxed. You have access to your higher cognition, so higher thinking processes. You can project yourself into the future. You can plan. You can play, you can use your imagination, etc. And, even if you're an adult, you still have that state. It's very different to how children express it. But this is the parasympathetic state where basically you're relaxed, right? You may know that state, when you go on holiday or when you're away from work or, you have no stresses or when everything is going well. So you are safe and things are okay, etc. So this is where the nervous system enters parasympathetic state. When there is no safety, there is a reason where your nervous system needs to respond in a different way. threats, emotional, psychological, mental, physical, or of any other kind, then the nervous system goes into sympathetic response. Otherwise known as stress response. And that is when nervous system has to gear up to get you out of danger, to get you out of that situation. In childhood, that's not possible, right? So when your body scans your environment and it reads a lot of different threats, that can be subtle. So very often that bypasses rational brain. It's called neuroception. It has nothing to do with your thinking. By design, that's an evolutionary mechanism. Animals have it, so you have no means to actually know about this. And we're only now making sense out of this. So sympathetic response, stress response. I'm trying to be very simple here because the most important thing for you here is to understand what states are you living day in, day out. And there are 5 main expressions. There are only 5 of the sympathetic response. Fight, flight, freeze, fawn, and hide. And I'm going to describe them first emotionally, okay? What they are emotionally. Fight, flight, freeze, fawn are forms of anxiety. This is when your amygdala is activated, your fear center. This is when there's a lot of tension, there's mobilization of energy in the body. The body sends information into your brain that you are under threat and there is an emergency. So the body gears up for action. And these 4 states are related to taking action, different kind of action, but still action. So you can't relax, you're out of control, you have no say as to how to react to what's happening. So there is adrenaline and cortisol. This is really important. There's adrenaline and cortisol in your body. Biochemically, physiologically, everything is changing. There's a cascade of things happening in your body. The same way in parasympathetic response, you're relaxed, everything works optimally, there is no tension, your heart is beating evenly, your breathing is not too shallow. But in sympathetic response, there's a cascade of things physiologically happening to mobilize energy, to get you out of the situation. So I'm not going to go deeply into this, but I want you to know that a lot of anxiety and depression, the experience is physiological. So it's your biology. It's not only your mental state. This is where we are conscious, and this is how we think. This is where we think about ourselves. So this is why we say mental health, but actually mental health, it's a physiological event. That's why when people have a panic attack for the first time, very often they go to emergency services because they think they have a heart attack. So fight people. These are the people who respond to their environment, to the stress that goes on around them by committing and taking action, committing to the environment, fighting the environment. The fight doesn't have to be physical. It's emotional, very often verbal. So you sort of argue your way out. These are the children with lots of energy who are constantly on the move, right? Who then become adults who are also on the move and they are constantly in the doing mode. So that becomes, you are very sophisticated. So that, can manifest itself in a lot of different ways. But physiologically speaking, of course, there's shallow breathing. Your heartbeat increases. So adrenaline and cortisol. And then you are on the constant go. You do things in a very fast way. You can't slow down. You can't rest. You are a moving target. You take a responsibility for everything what's in front of you. You are a generator. You have a lot of energy. You are generating solutions. The more plates are spinning, the better for you. And whatever you do to 100%. Partying, working, projects at work, whatever. Even if you go on holiday, you can't rest, right? When you rest, you feel guilty. And you have this productivity. You need to be doing something at all times because being is very uncomfortable, right? Emotionally, obviously, this is fear in each one of them. These are different kinds of anxiety, okay? So yeah, this is anxiety, okay? This is anxiety, and hide is depression. So those expressions are all about taking action, different style, different behavioral strategies to resolve the stress, to get away from the stress or to deal with the stress, but it's still about action. Hide mode, this is when nervous system decides to collapse. It's called shutdown. This is where any of those is not possible. And it's a protective mode. All of them are protective modes. All of them are all about keeping you safe, right? Whatever happened. So shutdown and collapse, this is the state where you completely detached, disassociated, numb, hopeless, right? I know a lot of people who have survived their childhood by sleeping. Or, you know, these are the people who feel unmotivated, they don't feel joy. There is very little energy in the system, only for like bare minimum. That's why when you're depressed, everything is costly when it comes to energy. It's very difficult to get out of bed. So in here, emotionally, you can have shame, despair, hopelessness, it feels like grief. Very often depression is about grief, okay? And here, obviously, you have a lot of different options. When it comes to fight people, it's normally fear of losing control. Dropping the ball. In flight people are the people who have learned, their nervous systems has learned the pattern of resolving stress by fleeing, leaving the room, detaching from the situation, not committing to the environment, okay? The stress, the physiological, the inner state is very similar, but these are the people who don't see themselves fighting. There is no point. It's very much related to the family dynamic, but we don't need to go into that. So these children, if that was you, you would have been a child who just avoids the situation, leaves the room, isolates himself or herself, right? Later on in adulthood, that would be someone who is anxiously avoidant, because these are all states about how you attach, how you deal with life in general. So these are patterns of behaving everywhere. This is how you work, how you parent, this is your relationship to your career, to your job, right? So in here you would have fear of people, fear of conflict, in here, these people, fight people, love conflict and intensity. This is how they feel in control. In here, you've got fear of conflict, confrontation. These people would say about themselves, or we call them, we call that social anxiety or shyness, right? Threes. Threes is a sort of in-between state where you start a lot of things but finish none. You in between, right? So you have a lot of ideas, you overwhelm yourself, you have those surges of energy, but then you collapse. This is the nervous system that has never learned to close the loops, never had enough support to actually learn to stay with things consistently. So you sort of thrive on novelty. You enjoy things when you open them up and you start them up, but you don't have the so-called patience or motivation to close the loop, to finish what you started. And this is very much ADHD energy. ADHD is actually a combination of freeze and fight, but for the sake of simplicity here, I'm going to stay with individual states. So these people call themselves lazy. Society, family would think of you as unreliable, and you would think of yourself as unmotivated, right? So these are the people who, because our perception is very important to like what you hear, how you perceive yourself, and what you hear from your family, friends, or whatever, right? Sometimes you are very much engaged with people, places, things, you go places, and sometimes you're not, or you say you want to do things, but then you don't follow through. And that, again, it has nothing to do with you. It has nothing to do with personality. It has nothing to do with your genetics, so to speak. It's all about the nervous system state. It's exhausting. All of them are exhausting. This is the state when you're sort of busy being busy, but you don't accomplish much unless you put under enormous pressure, or you absolutely must, and that sometimes even doesn't work. In here, people talk about fear of failing, but actually it has more to do with fear of being successful and finishing things, because you don't know how that feels and how it's done. So this is what scares you and overwhelms you. But you can have fear of change. You can have fear of responsibility. People feel also very guilty here. So you can have different expression, right? A lot of people who are anxious, they feel like a burden, they feel like a problem, even though that has not been the case for the longest time, since their childhood. But we do internalize the way we are being spoken to as children, and then we carry that into adulthood. Fawn, that is people pleasing. These are the people who, in order to keep themselves safe while being exposed to any kind of stress, emotional, mental, psychological, etc., they decide to please everyone, read everyone's minds, and do everything as expected. So good girl, good boy syndrome, being perfect, performing, being polite, being quiet, never rocking the boat, absolutely following every single order. In adulthood, that becomes a person who is the nicest person in the office, who always listens, apologizes a lot, like feels shame for asking a question or for taking up space or for anything. So these people, their sense of self is located outside of them. So they don't ask themselves what they want or desire or where they're going. They're constantly looking out for instructions from others. And in today's world, that's a nightmare, because with all the WhatsApp groups and everything, with being in contact, they feel obligation to other people more than to themselves. All of those states are states of self-abandonment. All of those states are stressful. All of those states are not natural. You could have been told by the system therapy or whatever that it's normal to feel anxious. No, it's not. Anxiety response is useful in stress, but our nervous systems shouldn't be activated at all times. When it comes to fawn, it's fear of rejection. These people are very concerned with other people liking them, with other people validating them, and they avoid being disliked. That's why they're so nice to everybody and everything, and they always say yes, and they extend themselves to others by exhausting themselves. So this is an emotional layer. And obviously you can have different aspects of it. You can have your own expressions. In fact, people cannot ask for help. Any of these people we cannot ask for help in survival. These are expressions of survival identity, right? You can have fear of asking for help. So what are you frightened of? We have so many different kinds of anxiety, like OCD, health anxiety, so many different kinds of OCD, right? Obsessiveness about a certain aspects of reality, our environment, etc. Agoraphobia, fear of big spaces, fear of trains, fear of whatever. It's all physiological. So now this is how we label that, right? Anxiety, then we give it an additional so-called deeper label. But this is an emotional layer. Now we're going to talk briefly about what happens in your mind. When your nervous system is in one of the survival states, in one of the sympathetic expressions, as we talked about physiologically, that's the core of the experience. Then we have the emotional layer, and then we get to the mind. And this is where we make meaning around how we feel, right? So, as you are a very creative and complex creature, and our psyche is an enormous realm in which things happen and we become conscious, and this is exactly what we're doing here. You are becoming conscious about yourself and you're realizing a lot of things that you didn't know previously, so that's self-realization. But in the mind, we have a narrator, we have the inner voice, we have ego, we have a lot of different forces at play, creative forces. So it's absolutely impossible to talk about everything to everyone. So I'm going to keep it very simple, but this is the level of the mind, and this is where the people are the most conscious. So this is where we have the most power. So fight people, as we talked about, fear of losing control, etc., intensity, overcommitment. So normally the narrative, I am the only person. So they feel a responsibility for everyone. I must do that. I must do that. There is a lot of I can't be losing, whatever. So there is a lot of performance, achievement is driven by that sense of, the ego, thinking that because these people are considered as very strong, right? They can't ask for help. So whatever the narrative you're going to build around that, and it could be in positive context and in negative context, okay? So, I don't know, when your friends are going through troubles, you're going to get involved and you're going to keep helping them, even though they would need to be held accountable, but you feel a sense of obligation because very often you are the only one in your family, in your group of friends who is capable of generating solutions, of helping, right? So there is a lot of tension and there is a lot of obligation towards being there for everyone and feeling a huge sense of responsibility. This is hero syndrome. This is a rescuer syndrome. This is a person who is everywhere at all times for everyone but themselves. These are the warriors who think that I'm a warrior, right? Well, you end up fighting with yourself. And these people are heading for burnout, right? Because it's absolutely impossible for your nervous system to be in this state. And how many examples do you know of people who have had everything, but they came a day when they couldn't get out of bed? Because if you can't ask for help, it's very unbalanced. These are fiery people who cannot tame the fire, and they feel the obligation they can never stop. And their mind is racing at all times, right? Their mind is racing, and they overestimate their impact. They overestimate their influence, right? By others, they would be called too much, too intense. These are extroverted people that you can see them at parties. They talk a lot. They are up for banter, discussion, right? So it's a mental load that happens because you obviously, if you're thinking about being committed at all times to your environment, then that becomes problematic, because as people, we keep doing what we think we are good at, and then we end up overdoing everything. Flight people, this is introverted people who usually undervalue the impact, right? So I am not important. People don't care. Isolation. Withdrawal, right? So you sort of keep yourself to yourself mentally as well, right? If you consider people unsafe, then that becomes an issue. That becomes very difficult. So you undervalue your input. You understand a lot. You really like people. Very often people are very sociable, but they don't know how to connect. So you're going to interpret everything and everyone like, they're not going to like me. Or you're going to undervalue your thoughts, your opinions, and your input and your impact. And that becomes chronic, right? From something that was adaptive becomes maladaptive, because that way of being ripples through your friends, your family, how you parent, your career. So obviously you avoid a lot of things, so you miss out on a lot of opportunities, relationships, friendships, very often hobbies, because you isolate and you keep yourself to yourself. So again, you can have a very specific reason for yourself. So normally it would be like, people are so you would justify it to yourself. Your ego would justify it to yourself why you're not engaging. People are too intense, people are too much, people are talking too much, people are stupid, people are, I'm not as clever, so I'm stupid. Whatever the justification for the inner state there is, pay attention, be mindful of that. Freeze. What these people think about themselves. I am lazy. Who cares? It's not that deep. You end up settling. These are people who are very ambitious and have a lot of ideas, but they can't close the loop, so they give up, right? And they do end up being very, very frustrated, sad, disassociated. Mind you, because there are so many different processes in you, you will have different defense mechanisms against something that you'll find too overwhelming emotionally, mentally, whatever. So you will disassociate, you will detach, you will leave your body just because it's too painful to deal with that state until now. So It's not that deep. So whatever the story, again, what is the story that you're telling yourself? Because this one is really about the story in your mind, right? What is the story that you have made around those states? So there must be something wrong with me. My brain is broken. Whatever the narrative is, it's just the interpretation of the state. This is nothing to do with your personality. This is nothing to do with your potential. And fawn people, again, other people know better. That is the main belief, assumption here. I don't know. Tell me what to do. They have what it's called external locus of control. And even though in many contexts, in many communities, in many families, that is very valued, right? To be polite and following all this, and never to rock the boat, right? Because being confrontational is, you know, frowned upon or whatever. But in here, they have a sense of self that is located outside of them. And there are so many people today that, you know, you can imagine for yourself or for others, that becomes really problematic. So very often people pleasers feel empty, right? In their mind even, because if you have not exercised your way of thinking, if you have not exercised the courage to express yourself, your authentic self, then you don't know how to do it. You don't know how to make decisions. You don't know how to function, right? And hide. This is the collapse and shutdown, a form of depression. If it becomes chronic, it's problematic, it gets darker, right? When you're hopeless, you don't have faith, you think the world is over, the life is over, etc. And obviously sometimes that happens. But the narrative is here that there is no point, right? Life is pointless. I am beyond help. And, you know, feeling shame and literally thinking about being in shame, shaming yourself, self-loathing. Right? That's a very difficult place to be. So as you can see, each type is very busy with different things. Very busy. And very often people are jealous of each other, right? Extroverted people are jealous of introverted people think that extroverted people have it easier, etc., right? So the self-perception is distorted. Everyone is looking at other people and they assume that they have it the worst. I don't know why is that, but that's what happens. You know, I'm the one suffering. This is victimhood mentality. This is victimhood identity, right? And what we need to be doing, we need to be observing and distancing ourselves from the fact that this is just an interpretation, this is opinion. That's why you can have the same event and 5 different people watching it, and everyone will see a different aspect of that event and hear a different thing, because you are a field of consciousness. You have a very subjective relationship to reality. You should be expressing your authentic self. You can't, because if you're in any of those, then your authentic self is suppressed that has started many years ago in your childhood where you couldn't express yourself and your consciousness wants to be expressed. We want to be ourselves, right? But you can't be yourself if you are in any of those or in a combination. People with CPTSD, so complex post-traumatic stress, or people who find themselves in different states, that is very dysregulated nervous system, right? And then the last part of the sequence is behaviours, right? Behaviours. This is what we see and how we do things. And in here we have a lot of different choices. But generally speaking, I'm not going to go into that in too much detail because you know exactly what you do. We are learning about the inner reality of yours and we're bringing attention to what happens internally. And that's the key of this masterclass, the key question for you. But it's extremely uncomfortable for the body to be in any of those. So what does the body do? The body is seeking soothing. I didn't even go into the prefrontal cortex. Any of those states where your prefrontal cortex is offline, you have no access to your higher thinking processes. Higher thinking processes are higher cognitions, executive function. So things like problem solving, planning, working memory, impulse control, speech. So if that is offline, that is altered state of consciousness in stress, in chronic stress, in any of those, then you can't think properly. You can't plan the future. You can't control your impulses. You don't understand the consequences of your actions. You can't actually think. All you want is relief. Because any of those states are very difficult to live in. So that's why eating, drinking, shopping, being on the go, seeking dopamine, gambling, whatever that is, it brings you relief. It brings your nervous system down. That's why we can't stop. That's why we don't stop after the one. That's why we want more and more, because higher dose is needed, right? So please don't think it's just a mindset issue. Please don't try to discipline yourself into doing something differently or, you know, starting over and fresh or whatever without addressing the state. Once you address the state, you regulate your nervous system, you teach your body safety, you know how to, then the behaviors will dissolve. You won't feel that desperate. You won't be seeking relief. Okay? And now, if you know the state, now you know how to regulate your nervous system. And you know which program to do, because they're very individual, right? So if a person is on the constant go, they need to slow down. If the person is constantly isolating, they need to start connecting with themselves first and then with people gradually. Slow down has to be also gradual. So freeze people, smaller tasks, less tasks, right? Or there is a lot of unexpressed creativity here, connecting with yourself through creativity. So it is very individual. Fawn people, learning to say no, that's the regulator. Because every day when you're performing those behaviors that affirm that identity and that affirm that state, you're going to be looping for years sometimes. And depression, when you're in collapse, you need to think about rebuilding energy. Movement, nutrition, hydration for 72 hours, and then we can start talking about regulation, right? But movement for some people is being upright because they've been in bed for a very long time, going just to the toilet. So things are really specific how to regulate the nervous system. And then once you rebuild that bond with your body, then you can recognize which energy your body is holding, so then you can do it yourself. That's why my programs, my courses, and my teachings are all about activating the inner teacher, the inner healer, being an expert on yourself and on your nervous system, and that's the only way to go. Thank you very much. I hope you've learned a lot. I'll see you in one of the programs. Bye bye.